In this video, we're going to see how we can use the same piece of HTML code, for example, as a footer or as a header for a website, and we're going to do it the simplest way possible. I'm not here to say that this is the best or the most general way, but it's probably the simplest way, and you can get your website up and running with a common header and footer within minutes. So as you can see, at the moment I have here three files. I have index.html, and then I have contact and about. And here on the right, we can see the website itself. This is the contact page. And let's visit, for example, the home page or the index page. So this is index.html, and this is my about page. My goal now is to add a common header and footer to these three pages. So let's start the naive way. Let's simply go to the index page, which is this one. And here I'm going to add three links. One link to the index page, another one to the contact page, and a third one to the about page. And of course, it's going to be in the body section, just above the H1. So I added a paragraph, and in this paragraph, I now have three links, one to the index page, another one to the about page, and the third one to the contact page. Let's now visit our index page, and we can see our three links here at the top. And also, while we are here, let me add here a little bit of CSS, just to make this small navigation bar a little bit clearer. And here it is. So to the paragraph HTML element, we now have some styling, and you can see that we set the display and also some background color. And if we refresh the page now, it looks this way. So this is fine, and this is what I want to serve as my navigation bar or as my header. But now we're running into the real question, which is how can we use this header in our three different files? So one way could be, of course, if I really wanted, opening one of the other files, let's say the contact page, and I could copy the code of this header and paste it here at the beginning of the body of this page, but of course I'm not going to do that. Functionally, this is completely fine, of course, because now I can visit my contact page and I still have my navigation bar. But if now I need to make any kind of change to my header, I'm going to have to do it in two different files, and this is why we want to be able to share the HTML code in the first place. And this is why we're going to use JavaScript. So let's start by creating our JavaScript file. So let me open my Project Explorer again, and here we're going to create a new file, so new file. And I'm simply going to call it headerfooter.js. Here it is. And the goal of this JavaScript code is to make some modification to our HTML page after it loads. So we can listen to the event that lets us know that the page just loaded, and then we can modify it. And to do that, we can use window.addEventListener, and the event we want to listen to is load. And this event is going to let us know that the page just loaded and now can be modified. And as a second parameter to add event listener, we need to pass a function. This is what's known as a callback function. And here we're going to use an asynchronous function, which is basically a function that does not have a name. And here we are going to modify some specific elements in our page. Now, which elements are the ones that we want to change? So to be able to grab them from the JavaScript and modify them and change them, we're going to assign IDs to them. So let's go back to the HTML page, and we're going to start with the index.html. And this paragraph, the paragraph for the header, this is going to have an ID. So here I'm going to have ID, and it's simply going to be header. And now it's going to be very easy for me to grab this element, to grab this paragraph element from the JavaScript code. So we can now see them side by side. On the left, we can see the HTML. On the right, we can see the JavaScript. And to grab this specific HTML element, we're going to use query selector. So document.querySelector. And now, since we are accessing an element using its ID, we need to add here the ID indicator, which is the hash sign. Then the actual ID of the element that we want. In our case, this is going to be the header element. So here I'm going to write header. And let's store this HTML element in a local constant. And now that I have access to this element, I can change its content. This can be done by accessing its inner HTML property. So header.innerHTML, and this is going to be exactly what we wrote here, right? Because this is the inner HTML that we currently have, but we don't want to write it explicitly in the HTML itself. We want our sole JavaScript file to do this job for us. So I'm going to move over this piece of code from the HTML to the JavaScript. So it's going to go here. But notice that here, since it's part of the JavaScript, and also it's a multi-line snippet, I'm going to use backticks. And inside these backticks, I'm going to paste the code. And to be honest, we're almost there. Now that we've done that, we have to link to the JavaScript file from the HTML file, of course. So here, as the last line of the body of the HTML file, I'm going to add a script tag, and the source for this script is going to be our JavaScript file, which is header-footer.js. Exactly this way, header-footer.js. Let's try visiting the website again, and we can see that our header is still up there, even though it was never written, it was never defined in the HTML code itself. The only thing we did is reference to the JavaScript file, which does add it to the HTML page itself. I can achieve something very similar for a footer. So if I do want a footer, let's add one here, and it's going to be in its own paragraph. I'll have to give it its own ID, and this time it's going to be footer. And let's use the same styling, so I'm just going to copy this style and paste it over here. And notice that I'm going to leave the body of this paragraph empty. It's not going to contain anything. And this is the important part here. This is what's going to allow me to reuse this piece of code and only change it in a single place in my code base down the line. So now that we have this empty definition of the paragraph for the footer, we're going to obtain it in the JavaScript code. So here, I'm going to have another constant called footer. And once again, this is going to be equal to document.querySelector. And this time I need the footer ID, just as it's written here. If I now want to add content to my footer, I'm going to do it here. So footer.innerHTML. And once again, I'm going to use the backticks. If it's a one-liner, you don't really have to use the backticks, but I prefer to do it anyway, as I think that it's a bit more general, doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to write here the copyright symbol, just as an example. If we now refresh the page, we now have both the header and the footer. And now we really are on the highway to use this same header and footer in the three of our HTML pages. So let me open here my contact page, and look how straightforward the process is after we created this foundation. So I'm simply going to copy this line, and this is all I'm going to need for my header. So I don't need all of this, I'm just going to paste this line. And what about my footer? Same thing. I'm going to copy it from here and paste it here. And the last thing we need to do is copy the reference to the script file. So let me copy this line and paste it here. And if we now visit the contact page, we can see that it uses exactly the same header and footer. Now, one thing that might bother you a bit is that the styling here is inline, and it has two drawbacks. First, at the moment we have to rewrite it every single time, right? Each of our HTML pages contains the same definitions for the CSS. And on top of that, working with inline CSS is not always the most convenient thing. So how can we work around this? Pretty easily, actually. First, we're going to start by creating a CSS file. And this CSS file is going to contain styling that's specific to the header and footer. And this is why I'm going to call it header-footer.css. Just like this, header-footer.css. And of course, I'm going to keep this file very simple. I'm simply going to copy the styling that we have here. And this is basically going to be the content of the new CSS file. And this styling does need to be contained in some class, so I'm simply going to call it header-footer. And now that I have it in the CSS file, I don't need it anymore here. So all of the inline styling from both here and also from the footer is going to be completely removed. And actually, we can simplify it even further, as this can be written this way, just like this. So we don't necessarily need a separate opening tag and a separate closing tag. We can just use one tag for the header element, and the same thing applies for the footer element. So it's just going to look like this. And now we are going to use the CSS file from the JavaScript file. So once again, let's open the JavaScript file. And the first thing we need to do here is add the link tag to load the CSS file. And this is why here we're going to use document.head.insertAdjacentHTML. And what this function allows us to do is to push a bit of HTML right to the HTML file itself. Specifically, it's going to add it to the head section of the document, so right here. And the first parameter that we need to pass to this function is where in this block we want the new tag to appear. And we have a few options here. So as you can see, we have after begin, after end, before begin, and before end. In my case, I'm going to choose before end, and it means that it's going to be added right here as the last line of the head section. And as a second parameter, we can simply write the HTML code that we want to be added. And in my case, it's going to be the link tag. And the reference is going to be to header-footer.css, of course, just like this. Now, since we want the CSS to be applied on these two paragraphs, the header paragraph and the footer paragraph, they need to belong to the class that we defined in the CSS file, because as you probably remember, in the CSS file, we are using a class called header footer, which means that these two paragraphs have to belong to this class. And this is why here, in the JavaScript file, I'm going to add this class to both my header and my footer. So this is why here I'm going to write header.className is going to be header footer, and we also want the footer to use the same class. So let's duplicate this line, but instead of header, I'm going to write here footer. And this way, both of these paragraphs, the header paragraph and the footer paragraph, are going to belong to the header footer class. Let's now open index.html, and it needs to be just as simple as what we have here in contact.html. So let me copy this, and this is going here, and this for the footer is going here. And the same thing for the about page. So we basically need 3 lines, one for the header, one for the footer, and a reference to the JavaScript script, which is this line. And if we now visit our website again, we can visit all of the pages of the website, and they all share the same header and footer.